Well, hello, guys. We are now in the classical period. If you were in a regular history class, they would call this Age of Enlightenment. What is the Age of Enlightenment? Well, this is another uh, obsession with the old dead Greek guys reinterpreted, okay? And so the 1700s were a time where philosophy was very important, influential, as compared to religion or politics. By politics, I mean, of course, the feudal system, which sticks around for a long time. So it's going to be around for a while. Although this period of time does see some earthquakes in regards to who's in charge. What are some of the changes? For one, we're going to see a rise of a true middle class now. And of course, or if you prefer, probably more influential would be like the bourgeois, which is, I guess you could say, middle class, but a little more important. Okay. The middle class has different values than aristocrats or the extremely wealthy. Okay. And so society is changing. It is changing. Um, so the middle class becomes very influential as well. We start to see things like the rise of universal education. Everybody should be educated because we're looking for talent in essence. Okay. Um, they would apply this to society and wanted to end social injustice and things like this. Well, okay. What are the important events? For Americans, we'd say, oh, it's the American Revolution, 1776. And yeah, it was very important for us. And yes, our founding fathers were steeped in Enlightenment philosophy. However, as far as the world was concerned, who cares, right? Because it was a small country a long ways away with very little money and almost no military. Nobody cared, right? However, because the French did help us in our revolution, they saw what was going on in America and they thought, we're going to take some of these ideas back with us. And the real earthquake is the French Revolution, 1789. Yeah, eventually, uh, this is where the bourgeois take over, the middle class, if you will, and kick out the aristocracy. And in fact, so they can't come back and take over again, they started killing them, cutting their heads off with a guillotine. Wow. Okay. Well, okay, because this happened in France, everybody thought, "Oh my God, this the whole of Europe is going to fall like dominoes." No, it didn't, but nevertheless, this is what they thought. What is classical culture for us? There are certain aesthetics associated with what we would call classical culture: balance, proportion, symmetry. And in music, specifically, we would say homophonic style, melody with accompaniment, right? Symmetry is now important. Remember the Baroque period, we had that lumpy pearl. Didn't matter so much, at least not the big picture. But in the classical period, it matters. Okay, so we're looking for balance and symmetry. We want nice, clear, beautiful, logical melodies and clear and obvious structures like sonata allegro, which kind of goes on steroids and gets blown up. But nevertheless, once you understand it, it's pretty obvious. Okay. What else happens in this period of time? Well, the symphony is born, standardized by Haydn. He didn't create it, but he standardized it. Same thing with string quartet. He standardized it. Haydn did, but he didn't create it, but he standardized it. Um, Woodwind quintet gets standardized, and the fugue, that thing that Johann Sebastian Bach was so good at, gets almost forgotten. Not completely, but almost. Okay. Um, I hinted at the end of the last Baroque period that opera becomes ripe for reform. And so there are some changes made in opera, which we'll talk about. Finally, even though the piano was invented during the Baroque period, it was a piece of junk and nobody wanted to play it. So they tinkered with it for decades until finally it got good enough that people said, "Oh, wait a minute! Well, we're gonna use this." Now, why did they get so excited about that? Because with a piano, by pushing harder on the keys, you can go from soft to loud, loud to soft, and so create graduated dynamics. This is one of the style for characteristics that they were experimenting with in the classical period to great effect, actually. And so graduated dynamics is a big deal. not the Baroque. Remember, we had terraced or shelf dynamics in the Baroque, but in the classical period, we have gradually increasing volume, gradually decreasing volume. Something else that's actually very important in music is the fact that um, they start selling music to amateurs. Now, this has a big impact on music, guys. Homophonic style is simpler than fugal style, okay? So there's that. Music does become a lot more simpler. That's one influence. But the other one is when you're trying to make money by selling music to a bunch of amateurs, amateurs, as a general rule, are not as good as professionals. So what do? Well, if you're smart business wise, you'll simplify the music so that an amateur could play it. And so a lot of music starts to get simplified so that more people can access it, basically. Okay. But this becomes a whole new industry, selling music to amateurs to play at home on their pianos. The piano was invented by Bartolomeo Cristofori in 1709. And here's the original name, guys. Are you ready? Gravicello Pianoforte. Large harpsichord with soft and loud. Now, you guys, you know how we are. We don't like long names. Hey, you want to come over and play my Gravicello Pianoforte? It's a really nice Gravicello Pianoforte. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, so it doesn't take long. So it's no longer a Gravicello Pianoforte, but a pianoforte, forte piano. Ah, heck, throw that out. Let's just let's just call it a piano. Okay, so that's how the piano, which is a rather loud, hard instrument, becomes a soft. Piano means soft in Italian, right? So it's just we didn't want to say all of it. So yeah, the Gravicembalo Piano Forte was invented in 1709, but it didn't start getting used until about the 1780s. This would be Haydn and Mozart time. Okay, right in the middle of what we're calling the classical period. Now, oh yeah, the dates. Oh, okay. Typically, some people would say the classical period goes from 1750 to 1800. All right, that's a pretty short period. 50 years is not a very long period. I would prefer 1730 to 1800. There are some people who would say 1730 to 1827. Now, 1827, that's an odd date. Why is that? Well, remember how they work. They look for a symbol, and so one of the symbols they like to use is the death of a composer. Well, somebody died in 1827. Can you guess? It was Beethoven. Okay, I have some objections to this, and I'm going to talk about Beethoven separately because he's a transition from the classical to the romantic period, and I'll state my thesis when we get there. But at any rate, somewhere but 1750 to 1800 is okay. 1730, 1800. I mean, you'll see me squirm, but if you say it ends in 1827, I may not like it, but there are people who will say that. Um, and the piano became really popular. Not only was it louder, but of course the graduated dynamics. Okay, because they were experimenting with this. Of course, somebody has to start it, and so one of the groups that we give credit for starting to experiment with this was the Mannheim Orchestra in Germany, and there was a composer in residence there who was experimenting with this and using the orchestra, and his name was Johann Stamitz. And when they would play these things in concert, people would refer to it as the Mannheim crescendo. Yeah, they're doing these crescendo things in Mannheim. Well, as it turns out, it's a really good idea. It works really well. And so everybody started using it. So it's no longer a Mannheim crescendo, it's just a crescendo. Okay. But in the beginning, they would refer to it as the Mannheim crescendo because, hey, they're the only ones doing it at first. In the Baroque period as well as the classical period, when we talk about these various periods, we look for the easiest way to understand what's going on in the music. Maybe not the only way, but the easiest. But the Baroque period and particularly the classical period, the easiest way to understand what's going on is through form or structure. Okay. And so we're going to spend a certain amount of time talking about form and structure. Maybe a little tedious, but it's important. I do believe it is the most important way, or the easiest way, shall we say, to understand what's actually happening in the music. So we're going to talk about form, which we will start right now. I've already talked about how they created this new system, and in the Baroque period I was talking about. We have these all these notes on this keyboard, and by now it's solidly in major minor. That's the only system in use now. Okay, and we create 2 to 6 note motifs we glue them together into phrases, and they get bigger, and then we have eventually a movement or a song, right? And so this idea of gluing things together. Well, these sections stick around, except that instead of being, when you look at the big picture with all these sections, there could be any number of them and not very, it's kind of lopsided. Well, in the classical period, now when you look at the big picture, they're going to want it balanced. And that's why ternary form is so important. A, B, A. So we have an opening theme, a contrasting piece of music, and then the theme comes back. Um, However, the simplest form that we will talk about, and I'll just start with that, is binary form, sometimes called song form. And that's simply A, B, binary, right? One, two. You guys hear binary type of music all the time. And what is binary? Well, one version of binary is a verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Now, interestingly enough, during this time, uh, we didn't use the chorus. It's just verse, then another verse, then another verse. So, but you can have a B form without having a verse. Okay, so let's do America, for example. We're going to divide this up into phrases, glue the phrases together into periods, and then we'll see how it works out. So we have the first phrase, which is A. Second phrase, B. We're going to repeat the first phrase again, A. Something different again, C. We glue those four phrases together into a larger section, a musical sentence, which we would call a period. That'll be a large letter A. Now comes the contrasting part. D D D D D D D E F G. Okay, so we glue those together. That's the contrasting section of music. It's all one big verse, but we have an A section and we have a B section, contrasting B section. So this would be considered binary form. Okay. Um, the simplest overall structure, probably for a song or a movement, but not all that common. And compared to others, I might say, especially during this period, because of course the most popular form is ternary form, A, B, and then the A comes back fully. And probably every musical appreciation class in the world uses Twinkle Twinkle Little Star to demonstrate this. So I'm going to glue a couple phrases together for a period, a couple of other phrases for another period, and then a couple more phrases will come back, the original ones, and that first A section will come back. So the first section, first of all, the phrases. A. B. Glue those together. It's a large sentence or a period. That's a large section. A. Contrasting period. Contrasted period, yeah. C. Okay, glue those together. That's our contrasting B. Now we bring back the entirety of the A section, like we heard the first time. A, B, A. Ternary form. A lot of people would tell you that sonata allegro form, which we're going to talk about a lot in this chapter, um, is a ternary form on steroids. Well, I mean, it's actually more than that, but okay, we could think of it that way. That's where it started. Originally, the origin of sonata allegro form was a ternary form, but it got blown up after that. Now, there's another form that's very similar to ternary form. The A comes back, but just not all of it. Okay, we would call this rounded binary. So, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Camptown Race. It's an old folk song, but B. That's our A section. Now let's move on to the B section. C. D. That's our B section, contrasting. And now we bring back A, but just not all of it. But it is recognizable. B. So that is rounded binary. Okay. All right. From that, those are the smallest structures we'll talk about for a song or a movement. Let's back way up now and get the big picture here, and we're going to look at large instrumental forms. And what that means, what I mean by large instrumental forms, large means multiple movements. Okay. In the classical period, we basically have two types of structures we're going to look at four. You could say four, but two of them use the same one, and the other two use the same one. Okay. So what we're going to talk about is the structure, the multi-movement structure for a sonata and a symphony, a string quartet, and a concerto. Okay. Now we start with a sonata. Sonata, by definition, is simply a piece of music for a solo instrument, and by implication, a lot of times, or yeah, just tradition, maybe I guess. Uh, it's implied that a piano might be in there. So it could be for example, a violin solo by itself, or it could be a violin solo with piano accompaniment. Okay, this would still be a sonata. Three movements: fast, slow, fast. First movement would be in sonata allegro form. Second movement would be probably theme and variations, though it could be some other things. And the third one would be rondo or perhaps sonata allegro again. So three movements. Now, let's say I write a sonata and it went over really well. It was very successful. So, well, why don't I blow this up into something bigger? So now what we do is trade out the piano and take the piano part and convert it into an orchestra part. So now we have a solo instrument with orchestra. This, by definition, is a concerto. So you can see, and that uses the same structure: three movements: fast, slow, fast, sonata allegro form, theme and variations, rondo, perhaps sonata allegro form for that third one again. So both of those, sonata and concerto, are three movements. All right. Then let's talk about the other two. We'll start with a string quartet. Now, a string quartet in the classical period, guys, two violins, a viola, and a cello. Not double bass, because a double bass just wasn't very good yet. Okay. This was standardized by Haydn, by the way. And they just didn't want to use that bass because it just didn't sound that good. All right. So, and that's the traditional string quartet clear up to this day. String quartet, the structure is different. It's four movements. Okay. So we have fast, slow, medium, fast. Now, I'm going to talk about the meters, which I didn't with the other, because all the other meters for the sonata and the concerto were duple for the most part. However, for the string quartet and the symphony, the four movements, one of which is going to be in triple meter. So the first movement will be duple meter and fast. Second movement will be in duple meter, but slow and a theme and variations. Third movement will be in triple meter and will be in the form of a minuet and trio. Very similar to a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So they did this to create contrast for the fourth fiery movement. Remember, contrast is where we create drama, right? So the fourth one would again be in duple meter. It would be fast and probably rondo form or perhaps sonata allegro form. Okay, and then I have this string quartet. It goes really well. So hey, let's blow it up into a symphony. Same structure: four movements: fast, slow, medium, fast, duple, duple, triple, duple, and sonata allegro form, theme and variations, minuet and trio, and then rondo or perhaps sonata allegro again. And so, even though we're talking about four named structures, they're only using two different ones, right? So there you go. And this is the standardized structure for these instrumental forms in the classical period. Okay, so now let's narrow it down to a single movement structure. Okay, and we've got four we're going to look at. In order of difficulty, basically. Theme and variations, then minuet and trio, then rondo, and then sonata allegro form. Okay, so we have first of all theme and variations. Okay, theme and variations, as you heard me say. Now, it didn't have to be; it could be somewhere else, but usually in the second movement. Okay, what is a theme and variations? We start with a theme. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And then we repeat it again, but now we make little changes. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. All right, now let's do it again. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Okay, I think you get the point. We repeat that and make these little variations as many times as you feel creative, and then when you're done, wrap it all up. Usually, you would repeat the first A section just so you can remember where you came from, but not always. Okay, the most famous one by Haydn is the second movement of his 94th symphony called the Surprise Symphony. He doesn't repeat the A section, but it's also really obvious what the theme is. So, this is what we would find in the second movement, right? Okay, then in the third movement, we would have a minuet and trio. Now, minuet and trio was in triple meter, similar to a waltz, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So, and this actually is derived from Baroque suite, really, because originally this would have been two different songs, minuet, and then a trio would be a separate song. So, but now this has been modified to a ternary form, A, B, A. So it's minuet and trio. So, excuse me, minuet, trio, and then return to the minuet. A, B, A. Okay. Now we start to see the difference in this, where they start messing with these ternary forms here, because quite often they would repeat that first A section, and so we'd have A, repeat it, A, and then a B section, then an A again. Okay, it's not really ternary anymore, but okay, that's where it was derived from. Okay, this particular movement, the minuet and trio, is usually the shortest one of the whole symphony or string quartet, and it's just to provide some contrast before we light up the fiery fourth movement. Okay, now we go to the fourth movement. Most likely, it would be a rondo. What is a rondo? This is again derived from something earlier. This is derived from Baroque French poetry. And the form for that poetry was A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, A. You could go on again until you run out of creativity, right? So we have a theme. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. That's A. Then something different. Okay, then A comes back exactly like you heard it the first time. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. So it's A, B, A. Again, something different. Boo! Boo! Okay, so A, B, A, C. Well, guess what comes back? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. So you get the idea. A, B, A, C, A, D, A, E, A. Either you're done or keep going. It doesn't matter, but probably you would finish with A. Okay, this is the original structure. Now, again, they started messing with it to turn it into something similar to a ternary form. So, what they did, this is now called sonata rondo, and it would go A, B, A, C. So far, the same. A, B, A. A, B, A, C, A, B, A. That's like an ABA, then a C section, then an ABA. So it starts to resemble a ternary form. Well, it doesn't resemble, it is a ternary form. Okay. And so this becomes more popular as we continue on through the classical period. And so it's no longer technically a pure rondo, it is sonata rondo. Okay. Now's the time to talk about the sonata allegro form. This is the granddaddy of the classical period. And it does start out in ternary form, ABA, right? But again, just like we did with the other things, we're messing with it. And so its form gets a little distorted. So the first section have similar names that we were talking about the fugue. So exposition for the first A section. And then what happens is in the A section, after you finish it, there's a repeat sign. So you go back and you do the A section again. The whole exposition is repeated. So it's A. Then the B section is called the development, just like the fugue in the second section. And then the whole A section comes back, and we're going to call this the recapitulation. But this time we do not repeat it. So we have A, B, A. They didn't stop there. Well, then we could add a coda, and then we could add an introduction. Yeah, so you can see it gets out of balance, and they put it back in balance. Then it gets out of balance, and they put it back in balance. But at any rate, what's real important for sonata allegro form is that the exposition is repeated completely, and we have the contrasting B section, and then that whole A section comes back. Now, there could Could be a coda, there might not be, we don't know, or an introduction. So we don't know. But this whole thing would be for a whole movement, and so somewhere between 3 and 8 minutes usually. Okay, you can and later on as we head towards the Romantic period, they get longer. But nevertheless, that covers it pretty well. Um, Now, the sonata allegro form was used in all of those multiple movement structures, instrumental structures in particular. But the concerto used it, but had a little bit of a variation on there. Okay, so now remember our definition of a concerto is a solo instrument plus orchestra, right? Okay, in a concerto, what happens? There's two things that are new. One, something they would call a double exposition. This does not mean that it is twice as long. This is basically what it means is like a long introduction. When the first time the exposition is played through, the orchestra plays nearly all the good stuff, all the good tunes and stuff. Then, when you do the repeat of the exposition, this is when the soloist will come in, and from here on out, the soloist gets all the good stuff. So you are repeating the exposition, but not exactly the same because first time is mostly orchestra, second time the soloist pretty much dominates everything from there on out to the B section and back into the recapitulation. Okay, so that's the double exposition. Now, the other thing that is different is in this concerto structure is as you get towards the end of the sonata allegro form or in the recapitulation, before we finish, you're going to come to a part where the orchestra is going to drop out and the soloist is going to go crazy. They're going to play high, they're going to play low, they're going to play fast, they're going to play slow. And it's basically all just to show off their virtuoso abilities, right? However, the orchestra will finish with soloists, so as they go on for however long it is, how do they know when to come back in? Well, one of the signals, or the signal really, for the orchestra to come back in was when the soloist would play a trill. A trill is when two notes are close together. Da, 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 da. So you go da 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 da. And when the orchestra would hear this trill, they put their coffee down, pick up their instruments, and they finish the piece together. And that would be the end then of the first movement of a concerto. And that's the only difference. Those two differences in the classical concerto, the double exposition and the cadenza. That cadenza is where the soloist goes crazy for a while by themselves. Okay, that's instrumental stuff. Let's talk about opera a little bit. Oh, yeah, you knew you weren't going to get away without talking about opera. Okay, I told you it was ripe for reform, and it was. The original form of opera was opera seria. And remember, the topics for opera seria were Greek gods and goddesses, Greek legends and heroes, and aristocracy and nobility, because supposedly they had the same blood in their system, right? Okay, but we had talked about the issues, formulas and the star system and leaving out choruses and all this stuff. And so it was ready for some change. Eventually, they do reform opera seria, but before that, what happens is they just simply invent two new types of opera. The first one is called opera buffa, literally translated comic opera. This has roots in the commedia dell'arte, which goes clear back to at least the Roman Empire, maybe before, and street performers, essentially. Okay. And now, you guys, when you're street performers, there are certain themes that crop up. And primarily the idea that street people are smart, are savvy, street smart, right? And the aristocracy, nobility, the wealthy, they're out of touch. They're just kind of dumb and don't really know how the real world works, right? And so a lot of their stories make fun of the aristocracy and nobility. Okay. And so when opera buffa is based on this. And so quite a bit of opera buffa in the beginning was banned because the aristocracy were quite offended and scared, actually, because of the French Revolution, that this was going to cause incorrect thinking, and they're going to boot out the aristocracy. A lot of people did think that way, and there were a number of revolutions, but the only one that was really successful was the French Revolution. Um, but anyway, opera buffa does get established. In fact, like the Marriage of Figaro by Mozart, that originally was banned. as being subversive. But at any rate, what's the difference? Okay, besides making the aristocracy look stupid, it's just about the average Joe having average problems. Okay, um, you know, is my bed going to fit through the door when I try to get it into my room and stuff like this, as opposed to grandiose gods and goddesses, things like this. Opera buffa eventually does become solidly established, and um, and of course we still have it today. Probably now. Here's where I'm going to start making my argument about the classical. Well, actually, I've already started making my argument at the end of the Baroque period, but that really the classical period probably should start in 1730s as opposed to 1750s. For example, almost everyone agrees probably the first opera buffa was La Serva Padrona by Pergolesi. This opera has three characters, and one's mute, doesn't even sing, and then the other two is a lord who has a large manor, and then his maid. And the whole course of the opera, he's trying to, you know what he wants from her, right? And so he spends the whole opera trying to get that from her. What does she want? Well, she wants the title, the money, right? The status. So throughout the course of the entire opera, she makes him look like a complete idiot. Okay. He looks like a complete fool. And in the end, she wins. So not only was he bested by a lower class person, it was a woman to boot. Wow. Yeah. Now, you guys, even Johann Sebastian Bach was aware that society was changing at the end of the Baroque because La Serva Padrona was written in 1733, okay? In the same year, Bach wrote, he didn't write any operas, okay? But he did write a cantata that was a secular cantata called the Coffee Cantata. Now, what's the topic here? It wasn't acted out per se; it was just sung. But you could, in later years, people did act this out because it's that close to being an opera, although it is technically a cantata. Um, um, what's the topic? Well, there's a father and a daughter, and he's concerned that she'll never get married because she's addicted to coffee. Who would marry a girl addicted to coffee? So, kind of silly stuff, right? But that's the whole point: is this is regular, normal stuff for regular, normal people. Okay. So that was 1733 also. Now, you guys, I've already talked about at the end of the Baroque, the style of music was changing as well to more homophonic, away from the fugal stuff. Society is changing. We haven't reached the French Revolution yet at this time, but it is changing. These are all parts of the argument that I would say that really we should consider the classical period from 1730s ish. Okay. Okay, that was the first type of new opera to be invented. The second type is called Singspiel, and notice the German. Yeah, so the first time, in at least an opera, we've got stuff being named in German instead of Italian. That's a signpost, guys. That says, "Hey, the times they are a changing." Okay, up to this point, the Italians dominated everything. They were first, and they were the best for a long time. But now the Germans, and who are the two big heavyweights of this division? Haydn and Mozart, both Austrians. So there you go. Okay. Um, Singspiel actually has a long history too, but not a very lofty one. Singspiel was a very earthy type of entertainment, very body kind of humor in Germany. And if I had to give an equivalent to where you would go to see something like that today, I mean, I'm not kidding, probably a bar or even a strip club or something like that because it was that kind of humor and that kind of, Now, a Singspiel sometimes was nothing more than just kind of a loose variety show, but oftentimes they would tie it together with a loose storyline. Okay. Well, Mozart had a buddy named Schikaneder who had this story he wanted Mozart to set the music. And Mozart was all game to do this because Mozart wanted to elevate German art forms to be on the same par with Italian. He really was irritated by the Italians, and so the result of this was opera, The Magic Flute, which many people think maybe it's the most often performed opera in the world. What is it about? Gods and goddesses, legends and heroes. Well, wait a minute. I thought we said they weren't doing that. Well, this is German gods and goddesses, German legends and heroes. So they're exploring German culture now. in an effort to try to unify the peoples. Now, right now, there's like, I don't know, like 287 German kingdoms and principalities throughout Europe. But that changes when we hit the Romantic period. But for now, they're all over the place. But nevertheless, the Germans are starting to assert themselves culturally. And Mozart raises up the Singspiel to a level that everybody considers to be true art form now in the Magic Flute. And not only he, but other composers as well wrote Singspiels following, and the Singspiel is still with us. Now, the Singspiel, you guys would recognize the structure of it because it would be the same as most contemporary musical theater. You would speak the dialogue. The Italian opera, you sang everything. But with the Singspiel, you would sing the arias, you'd sing the choruses, and then most of the recitative, you would just speak it like dialogue and act it out like a play. And then when it comes time to sing, you sing. And so, in this regard, Singspiel is very, very similar to musical theater. Okay. Okay. So these are the two new types of opera. They do eventually try to reform opera seria as well, bring back the chorus and all this kind of stuff. Um, let's talk about the two heavyweights in this division, shall we? First one is Mozart. Now, years ago when this movie came out, Amadeus, everybody thought they knew his name, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. What if I told you there never was a person by the name of Amadeus? Here is Mozart's full name: Johannes Chrysostomos Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. What? Well, okay, the first two are absolutely baptismal names, saints and whatnot. Okay, he went by Wolfgangus. Okay, and the name we're going to zero in on, though, is Theophilus, which in English would translate as God love. In German, it'd be Gottlieb, which is what his father apparently called him quite a bit. Gottlieb, come here. Maybe it was when he was in trouble. I don't know. So Wolfgangus Theophilus Mozart. Okay, so Amadeus. Well, the French, that means God love, right? God love in French is Amadei. What's close, right? But not exactly the same. So then what he would do, just like his first name, Wolfgangus, they put a suffix on the end. You could call that a Latin or Greek suffix. And so now we have an Amadeus, okay, and this is a name that he actually did sign music to often. I don't think he ever officially changed his name, but why did he do this? Was it because he wanted to be important? No, quite the opposite. He was poking fun at it, that it sounded lofty and stuffy. And he was very anti the feudal system, guys. You got to understand the feudal system, very strict class system. Okay, and Mozart didn't feel himself inferior to anybody, and he absolutely hated the fact. Well, okay, let's talk about his life. He was a child prodigy, so at 3, 4 years old, he's already composing and performing, and wow, okay. And then he started touring Europe as a kid. His father would take him and his sister, who was also a virtuoso, and they toured Europe for years, making money and becoming really famous. Okay, and then eventually Wolfgang grows up, and so his father was a servant to the Bishop of Salzburg. Now, during this period of time, the church fathers acted very much like aristocracy and nobility, and they had servants and the whole 9 yards. So he signs up Wolfgang as a servant to the Bishop of Salzburg, which absolutely infuriated Wolfgang. But there was nothing he could do about it. Now he was stuck. So what was he going to do? Well, he just proceeded to make such a big pain in the backside of himself to try to make the bishop so mad he would fire him. Now the thing is, the bishop wasn't stupid; he knew what Mozart was doing, but he still Mozart kept it up till finally the bishop got so mad. Okay, fine, that's enough. You're done. Get out of here. And Wolfgang said, "Okay." And off to Vienna he goes, where all the cool composers are hanging out, and he proceeds to be a freelance composer. Now, there's a certain amount of academic arguments in academic circles, debate, if you will, about Beethoven. There's no question Beethoven was the first truly successful freelance composer. Beethoven was smart with money, and no problem. We know that. Now Mozart was dead broke when he died, but the thing is, the personalities are so different. It's hard to compare because Mozart was a party boy. He was known to go 2, 3 days without sleep. As they say, water. I mean, money ran through his fingers like water. He just couldn't hang on to money. He would just spend it. And so, thing is, you have to understand though, is he made a lot of money. Okay, so had he been a different personality, could he have saved some money? Yeah, probably. If he had been a different personality, maybe he wouldn't have made as much money. I don't know. These are all, you know, imagine. Who knows? But at any rate, he goes to Vienna, where Haydn. This is where he meets Haydn, and they become good friends actually. And he proceeds to be a freelance composer. And then at a pretty young age, 35, almost 36, he comes home. His wife had gone to the baths to recover her health, and the house was locked, and he forgot his keys, so he just decided to sleep in the ditch, caught pneumonia, and died. So now the thing is, guys, uh, this period of time, there's still things like plague and stuff trying to pop up every now and then, and so they're very worried about bodies bringing all kinds of bad things. So they took his body and buried it in a pit with a bunch of other dead people, spread lime over it to prevent disease, and then buried it in a common pit. So nobody really knows where he's buried. There's a statue, but that's not where he is. If you're one of these that likes to visit famous grave sites or whatever. But at any rate, that's Mozart's life. Didn't live that long, but he wrote 41 symphonies and 20 some operas. And yeah, so he was the big one of the big giants of his period. The other one is Franz Joseph Haydn. Very different kind of personality. And now what you need to understand here is that Haydn, for many, many years, was actually considered the real genius of this period, not Mozart. If we're gonna, and it wasn't until the 50s or so that we started to flip our view of things and make Mozart the genius. If we're gonna be real honest, Haydn had way more influence with instrumental music. Mozart had way more influence with the operatic music. In fact, Mozart called himself an operatic composer. Okay, uh, Haydn did write operas, but they're not that good, really, and we don't do them much anymore because they just really aren't up to snuff. His instrumental music, though, it's quite good, and he wrote a lot of it. He lived a long time. He lived to be 77 or something like that. And so he lived a lot of years, almost 80, maybe. I don't know. But at any rate, he's 75, I guess it is. But at any rate, Haydn was a court composer for the Esterhazy family, the ruling family of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was a servant and glad of it. Mozart's father, too, by the way, was very glad to be a servant because it was a cush gig. They got paid pretty decently. They got vacation. He had all the resources he needed to play his music every time he wanted to write something. For a musician, that was like a dream job. And Haydn felt the same way too. And so he wrote a lot of the music for the ruling family there, the Esterhazys, and until for decades, until the prince died. The new prince wasn't quite as fond of Haydn, and Haydn wasn't quite as fond of him. So they agreed to let him retire with a pension, and he goes off to Vienna, where all the cool composers are hanging out. And eventually, he and Mozart meet and become good friends. And then while he's there, knock, 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 the English come calling, and they say, "Well, excuse us, Mister Haydn, but yeah, we still can't seem to raise a good composer, so we'd like you to come to England and make some money." Now, Haydn was quite aware of what had happened to Handel. Handel had gone to England and just hit a gold mine there, right? So Haydn thought, well, yeah, I want to do that too. What's the difference, though? Haydn was in his 70s when he decided to go to England. He had never left the few miles around Vienna for 70 some years. Now he has to go across stagecoach, clear across Europe, has to go across the English Channel. Turns out he's a very bad boat rider. He was sick as heck for all the way across. Then he gets to England, and if you've ever been to England, guys, take your umbrella because the weather is awful. It rains all the time. So, yeah, England is not famous for its beautiful weather, let me tell you. So Haydn was there for 2 years and really depressed. Now, the thing is, he was quite successful. He wrote a lot of music, and people loved it. He made a lot of money, but he just couldn't stand being there. He was homesick, okay? So then eventually he packs up and goes home again. And that's where he eventually does die, is in the Vienna area. And that's Haydn. So because he lived so much longer, he wrote a lot more music than Mozart. He was also a very famous pedagogue, meaning a teacher. So he influenced other composers who were making their mark. And the fact that he was the composer for the Esterhazy family throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire, this gives him a lot of clout. So Haydn had a lot of influence. This is why he's the one that standardized the symphony. He's the one that standardized the string quartet, etc. Okay, so yeah, these two guys though really stand heads taller than everybody else during this period of time. And I guess that's pretty much going to wrap up the classical period for us. I will address Beethoven next separately. At any rate, guys, we'll see you then.